Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 17th of our Contemporary Group online talks. I'm very pleased to welcome all the way from Sydney, Australia, the environmentalist, the educator, and the artist who is Len Metcalf. I came across Len's work at the AGM and was blown away by it. And we had a chat, and he agreed to repeat that talk with some twists, I think. Is that right, Len? For us this month. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we'll talk to Len, who's a very successful educator, has his own school in Sydney, and is a great lover of everything in the nature, and we've just described, as he's just described, the mountains where he was born. So I'm going to stop sharing now.
Well, let's start. I am the Lorax. I speak for the trees. I speak for the trees, for the trees have no tongues. Now, they are really, really wise words from the Lorax, quoted in Dr. Seuss's book, The Lorax. What a beautiful book that is. One that I've used for many, many years as an environmental and outdoor educator to talk about forests and trees and environmentalism in a beautifully illustrated children's book. Now, did you know it was actually his favourite book? And for me, it's incredibly special. So here is my Lorax tree. Isn't it just so, so beautiful? And they were truffula trees that he was talking about and had those tufts on top of them. So, so beautiful. Trees are so, so, so special to me. It's really hard to say where my love of trees originally started. You see, I can remember a tree in the backyard, one that I would climb and sit on a plank of wood up in there. And, do you know, I can still remember the triangular shape of its structure and how to climb up there and sit there. And it was a plum tree, and it had the most beautiful purple coloured plums. This passion for trees just drives me. I used to joke at first and say, I'm a tree photographer. And I really didn't understand at the time that it was a deep-seated passion to keep returning to trees throughout my whole life, photographing them, working with them, fighting for them, educating others about them, playing with them, using them for my art. You see, trees are now have become my muse. They entertain me. They give me my inspiration. I keep returning to them over and over and over to photograph them. My muse. You see, I am a deep-seated environmentalist. For some reason, I tend to put the welfare of the environment before and above other things in the world. Not always, but for as much as I can. I'm a great believer in Mother Nature. In fact, I just love Lovelock's idea of Gaia, which is the Greek goddess. And remember, as he circled, one of the astronauts was circling the Earth and looked down and saw the planet and thought of the Earth as a whole, complete God, as a whole ecosystem, and hence That's when Gaia theory really started to take hold in a different format from an environmentalist format. See, Gaia is our ancestral mother, isn't it? Don't you just love that notion, the whole planet as one living organism? Personally, I like to worship her, Mother Earth. And I can only hope that you do too. Now, I want to take you to the Tarkine, or the Tarkine. It's one of the places in Australia that has a dual name. It has the Indigenous name and the Western name. Do you know, this is one of my absolute places to photograph. Absolutely gorgeous. It's one of my favourite places to visit. Do you know, 3 metres of rainfall per year is a normal year. That's 10 feet, and 6 feet of rain is a drought year. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Now, the Tarkine is down there at the bottom of Australia at a Lutra, which is Tasmania. Now, you have to excuse my pronunciations with the Indigenous language. We're still only grappling and learning to speak, and dual place names are being introduced, and I'm dyslexic, so reading a name out of letters is incredibly difficult for me. Anyway, Tasmania separated from Australia about 8,000 years ago when the ocean levels rise and the land bridges closed over water. In fact, Indigenous stories passed down for those 8,000 years talk about the rise of the ocean and then how they get held back by the huge cliffs in the Great Australian Bight. They're 60-metre cliffs, and the waves crash into the bottom of them. And you can see those when you drive across the Nullarbor Plain. Now, this is where the Tarkine is, and it's basically the north western corner of Tasmania. What a beautiful place it is. It's the heart of wilderness. What is wilderness? Well, wilderness is an area with no human influence. It's unmodified, unchanged. There's no agricultural cultivation. It's what the country looked like before colonisation, which is only just over 200 years ago. And here, miles from humanity, nature lives untouched. What a beautiful place to be. In fact, it has the cleanest air in the world. You see, the Southern Ocean blows into my face here, and there is nothing until we hit Patagonia across there in South America. In fact, it clears the Cape of Good Hope down in South Africa there by a long way. And the weather, it blows up from Antarctica, cold and fresh in your beautiful face, the cleanest air in the world. You see, the Tarkine is a Gondwanaland rainforest. Gondwanaland, well, that was a huge supercontinent that existed 5,500 million years ago. Oh, I said that wrong. 550 million years ago. Anyway, this is the largest Gondwanaland cool temperate rainforest in Australia. It's covered in rainforest. And here we have the same species grown and coming through in that lineage from when all those continents were together. And I mean South America's Patagonia, New Guinea and New Zealand and Australia were pushed together as one large supercontinent. And here down in the Tarkine, we have 1 million acres of wild country. That is 400,000 hectares of virgin wilderness. In fact, 90% of the Tarkine is currently intact as wilderness, untouched by humanity. So, so, so beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous. You know, it's the second largest temperate rainforest in the world. It's the largest in Australia. It's the largest wilderness dominated by rainforest in Australia. As a rainforest, untouched, it stores carbon. It's one of our keys to climate change. It provides us with clean air and fresh water to drink. And there in this beautiful wilderness are so many rare, threatened and endangered species. It breaks my heart to talk about them. There's over 60 that are endangered and threatened. One is the orange-bellied parrot. Do you know that there's 50, less than 50 adults living in the wild? 50 adults. That's less than 25 pairs, isn't it? Isn't that amazing? It's Australia's 5th most endangered species. We have the swift parrot, one of the fastest parrots in the world. We have the Tasmanian wedge-tailed eagle on this list. We have the Tasmanian devil. All of these animals are so close to extinction, and they live here in Tasmania, in the Tarkine. You see, we also have the Tasmanian Giant Freshwater crayfish. Do you know it's 1 metre long? That's 3 feet, 6 kilos. Well, that's nearly 8 pounds. It's the largest freshwater invertebrate. It's an endangered species. It's on the IUCN Red List. And it lives in these beautiful, pristine, clear, gorgeous waters of this huge wilderness area. Unpolluted, clean water. We also have the Huon pine. Now, the Huon pines generally grow on the water's edge. And here they are on the Pyman River, deep in the Tarkine, miles from anywhere. They have a beautiful thin cone. Absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous trees. And while they're no longer endangered and critically endangered, they were for a long time, and our government luckily banned the cutting down of them, the felling of them. The reason that was so sought after and became endangered was their antibacterial and antifungal properties. And they make the most beautiful boats, the Huon pine boats. And there were so many shipyards in Tasmania, mainly run by convicts, actually building these most gorgeous boats out of these pine trees. And here is one here, this female, almost like it's sipping water from the edge there. Now, quite easily they can be 2,000 years old, 3,000 years old even. Slow growing, survivors, absolute survivors. There's a stand just on the edge of the Tarkine I think it's Mount Field. Maybe I've got that wrong. And there's this one stand of trees, and the whole stand is one tree. And it keeps multiplying by reaching down to the earth and taking root and growing again and again. Do you know that stand is 10,000 years old? The Huon pine is the second oldest living tree in the world. Such a beautiful tree. And look, there's another beautiful female there growing. Look, and there's a male one, just to show you the difference between the two. Gorgeous. Something that I spent a long time trying to find and then identify, 5 or 6 visits before I started photographing and finding ones that I could actually photograph. We also have the white-bellied sea eagle, a beautiful bird I seem to have befriended recently. They're up and down the whole coast of Australia, and so not endangered. But here's one looking back at me, almost ruffling its feathers, poking its tongue out, enjoying being photographed there. And as you can see, I'm not really a bird photographer. I'm more interested in the tree and as its habitat living there. Well, they live in pairs, and actually they're monogamous, and they hole up together for years and have build huge nests and look after their babies. And here's a pair just enjoying this wilderness area in Tasmania. I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the Palawa people as the traditional and original owners and continuing custodians of this land on which we look at today, and acknowledge the elders both past and present. You see, the Tarkine is one of Australia's greatest archaeological sites. It's full of this incredibly rich heritage protected by this wilderness. It's kept people out for so much time. Indigenous people walked down to Tasmania between 60 to 40,000 years ago and came down to live right here in the Tarkine. We have these beautiful petroglyphs. Petroglyphs are rock engravings cut in to the mudstone. Now, this is at Lara Turanaun, which is the indigenous name. The white locals call it the Sundown Point. And here we have these beautiful circles, which often traditionally were talked about water, but maybe they talked about many other things as well. Amazing. Such a beautiful, rich heritage. There's evidence that the indigenous people lived here. This is actually West Point, right here, looking out into the ocean in huts for at least the last 2,000 years. Permanent, semi-permanent housing. There's huge indents into the ground where you can see where the soil has worn away and the hut walls have been replaced and the ground wears down. Can you imagine having this? This is the westmost point of Tasmania as your beautiful view to wake up to. You see, the Tarkine is full of middens. Now, middens, well, they're basically the rubbish dump of the indigenous people. It's a pile of shells and bones discarded, piled up to huge piles. Can you imagine a pile of shells that's 90 metres by 40 metres wide? That's huge, isn't it? That's a couple of swimming pools just in a pile of shells. And they go deep down and are full of archaeological data and incredible history. They're archaeological time capsules back to a time past, and their presence shows us their sacred sites. And so the Midden becomes a sacred site because that's where we sat to aid and celebrated together in groups, often in large gatherings. And full of shells. Well, they're next to the ocean here, right next to the sea. Now, the Australian government, in its infinite wisdom, has, and I'm being sarcastic there, of course, has created the Arthur Pyman Conservation Area. And that is a 2 kilometre by 100 kilometre strip right along that coast, just this little bit of sand along the coast of the Tarkine, and preserved it and said, well, we've done our job for preservation. Do you know that's a mere 10% of the area, and that's that 10% includes some other national parks and areas that actually have preservation orders. The rest, well, we'll get back to the rest. I think that this area, and I'm not alone, and it's been proposed that it should be considered as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Places here in Australia that are World Heritage are the Great Barrier Reef, Kakadu, the whole southwest of Tasmania, the Ningaloo Coast, and one that's very close to my heart is the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area, which I was lucky enough to be living in at the time. This is where I'm from, the Blue Mountains, when it was nominated and carried through and declared a wilderness area. And fences were put up and we were stopped from driving into it, and the only way we can get into it is when we walk into there. And we have this incredibly beautiful area now preserved and held up, and we have some international weight to maintain its status. So special. The Tarkine, do you know, if it was put up to be a World Heritage Area, it would meet 7 out of 10 criteria. 7 out of 10. Now that probably doesn't sound so much, but 7 out of 10 would actually put it right up the top of wilderness areas. And there's actually only one other wilderness area in the world that is a UNESCO World Heritage Site that meets 7 out of 10 criteria. Most meet 2 or 3. And this is part of my fight, is this preservation of this incredibly special, sacred place full of this incredible rainforest. You see here in Australia, and particularly in Tasmania, we have this culture of dig it up, cut it down and dam it. dig it up. Well, that's mining, isn't it? We want to take the minerals out, strip it from the minerals. Logging, we want to strip the trees away, cut them down. And damming, it's about creating hydroelectricity. So sad to think about all of those things. Do you know 90% of the Tarkine is under mining tenure? 90% can be mined. That's an incredible amount of an area that's worthy of World Heritage status. Look, here's our beautiful Huon pine on the banks of the Pyman River. If we were to mine, this river would be full of noxious chemicals, wouldn't it? And heavy metals. This tree could be lost, this very tree. So sad to think about those things. You see, the land is full of zinc, copper, and lead. This is how I feel. Rips out of my heart. So sad. So destructive. There could be so much in that wilderness, medicines, animals, plants we still do not know about, or even know about the health properties that they might contain, or the lessons that they may teach us. Do you know open cut mining is how we would strip the Tarkine? Open cut mining is the most damaging of mining operations because it totally strips the country, doesn't it? It leaves it bare. Now, the companies, they usually sign in their contract a promise to rehabilitate the land. And unfortunately, here in Australia, we have a long history of selling the mine off just before it's finished for quite a big loss. And someone buys it. And then mysteriously, once they own it, go bankrupt. And once they're bankrupt, obviously they can't afford to rehabilitate the land, and it's left bare. That our government doesn't do it. It just leaves it there and goes, oh, what was terrible pity that was. Quite a strong strategy that they have, and it's been used over and over so that they don't have to clean up. They actually do that with oil rigs as well, don't they? Sell them off just before they run out, and mysteriously someone else goes bankrupt again. Do you know that there are more trees than on the planet Earth than there are stars in our galaxy? It's estimated that we have about 3 trillion trees. And our galaxy, the Milky Way, has, it's estimated, between 100 billion and 400 billion stars in the Milky Way. That's just amazing to stop and think about. We're blown away by how many stars they are, but I ask you to consider to be blown away by how many trees there are on this beautiful planet. And we are at the moment in this height of unprecedented deforestation. We cut down more trees every day than we ever have in the history of us humans on the planet. Can't you just hear the chainsaws ripping in to this beautiful virgin rainforest? Oh, I can hear the bulldozers. ripping down the trees with they actually have a couple of huge bulldozers and put a steel chain between them and just drive through the forest, ripping all the trees down in their path. Now, at the moment, there are 150 coops designated for clear felling. Clear felling. This is our great Australian way of logging. We go in, we cut down everything, absolutely everything. And we take the good bits of the log and we put them on a truck and we take them down to the docks and we wood chip them. And we send them overseas and they come back to us as toilet paper. So we can wipe ourselves clean and flush the dirt down the toilet. And the rest just gets burnt. In fact, they use a napalm-like substance, a jellified petroleum, and pour it all over the ground and set it alight. They do this to kill absolutely everything, so that when they come in to plant their plantation forest, there are absolutely no natives to compete with the planted trees. They also put carrots out covered in 1080 poison to make sure that there's no animals left to eat these trees either. It's rip, wood chip. Oh, it makes me so sad. So much is discarded. And for what? An old growth forest for toilet paper. Now there's this wonderful argument that it's an economic thing. Well, do you know the Australian government over the last 20 years has subsidised our logging industry by $1 billion. $1 billion the government has given the industry to give the jobs to cut down the trees. I find that absolutely horrific, that we're chopping down the trees, subsidising it in this false economy. And for what? We're losing an old growth forest for toilet paper. This is, to me, economic vandalism. Makes me think of the Lorax. Do you know what the Lorax said? "Sir, you are crazy with greed." It's just absolutely crazy. And the more I research, the scarier it becomes. Now, this is all about education, isn't it? And I am an educator. In fact, I'm more of an educator than I am an artist or a photographer even. I've been teaching for as long as I can remember. I started teaching as a scout, where we helped the younger kids learn how to tie knots and put up tents and sail and navigate and abseil and then rock climb. I started teaching very young, and I started working in an environmental education centre. Education is incredibly deep in my heart. Why? Well, I think that for me, as an agent for change, I get a huge kick out of helping other people. And so my challenge to you today is I ask you to educate others, to join this fight for the trees, well, for the environment. It's not just about trees, it's about the larger environment. That's just the bit that I'm passionate about. You know, we face climate change. The It's the world's biggest problem that as we head forward, and we've been known it's been coming for over 100 years. We've been talking about it. Uh, it's been an issue for me as an environmental educator for the whole of my adult life. So I ask you to educate others. And to do that, you need to start conversations. You need to start talking to people, sharing, communicating, telling stories. Stories is one of the absolute keys to education, is passing on and sharing such special stories. And of course, this beautiful Tarkine, it's only one area of many thousands of areas around the world that need our environmental protection. And we know how crucial that is as we move forward into the future. Education, conversations, it's about enlisting others, convincing them, calling them to action. It's through education that where change can happen. And you see, I have a background in environmental and outdoor education. And as soon as I left school, this is where I cut my teeth as an educator, in the bush, in the native areas. At first, it was teaching rock climbing and canoeing, and it soon became talking to young people about the worth of trees and the whole ecosystem. You know, my biggest fear is the lack of connection that we have as we move forward into the future with Mother Nature. It's a huge fear that we become so separated. In my life working with kids, I met children that couldn't boil water to make a cup of tea on a stove. That food came out of packaging and didn't understand the relationship of what they ate and where it came from and the whole cycle, not even understanding of how the air is cleansed by these beautiful trees and brought to us. I really think as we move forward that we must try to reconnect with Mother Nature, to share that beautiful bond and to build it into our school systems, into our curriculums, and as we go forward. We must teach our children to interact with it in a healthy and sustaining manner. And for me, it's also about an incredible spiritual connection to Mother Earth. You see, for me, nature heals me. Nature is my greatest teacher. Sometimes I say art is my greatest teacher, but that's about who I am personally. Nature teaches us about the larger world and where we fit into it, and it gives us lessons that nowhere else can give us in life. I believe that wilderness heals, and we should be preserving these wilderness areas, this Tarkine, for that very reason, let alone for so many others that are becoming so pressing today. Beautiful. Don't you find that Mother Nature answers so many of your questions? You are in a unique position in the world because you have a visual voice. You have the ability to talk with your images, with your photographs, to use them as tools for conversations, for starting these incredibly valuable conversations about where we should go next and who we should vote for, and holding our governments accountable, and the media barons that dominate the conversations that are held in public. I don't want this beautiful place in the Tarkine to be just a memory of a place that once was. I worry about environmentalism. I worry about the environment. I worry about climate change, consumerism, humanism. I even worry about our mental health as we are distanced from the wilderness. These are all different conversations that you can use your imagery to talk through. So consider becoming an ecological defender by using your art, your photography, to start and have these incredible conversations. Use your photographs to tell stories and to educate the world about the issues that are important for you. And it's probably different to me and my trees. It might be the birds, the elephants, the melting ice caps, the changing weather, that lovely little stream down the road that is going to be wiped out by developers. Educate people to look after our home. Now, I don't know if you know about Peter Dombrovskis. He's one of Australia's most celebrated and famous photographers. And this particular photo was used by Bob Brown in the early beginnings of the green movement here in Australia. As a political party and taking it beyond. This double-page spread landed in every newspaper in Australia. And quite rightly, this campaign about saving the Franklin River here in Tasmania, this is a bit further south of the Tarkine, was the key issue in the election. And the government that stood up and said, yes, I will stop this dam, got over the line. And in 1983, this dam was stopped. You know, this photograph is part of our history in telling the story about this river. Photographs, stories, education can be incredibly powerful. You see, there's also a huge movement in the world about ecocide. Ecocide is this idea that it becomes a new international crime when you willfully damage the environment. It is picking up momentum, and many countries and legal systems are taking it on board, and it is growing incredibly well. And in fact, there's so many different models and ways that it can be done. Some places will actually even give legal rights to Mother Nature. You see, in New Zealand, there's a river that was given the legal right to flow free and to be clean and not to be dammed, or so people were able to take environmental polluters and water stealers to court, defending the rights of the river. I find that story so beautiful and powerful. Now, you might notice that my photographs have become, like here, passionate, like your fingers scratched down in a chalkboard. You see, there's a huge part of me that is an artist. And art is about having a visual voice, isn't it? It's about saying things. It's a means for us to express ourselves. Now, it may be for other people, or it may just be for ourselves. I so love to make art for myself, for my own enjoyment, rather than Instagram likes or to win competitions. I'm more interested in something that speaks to me deeply and personally. But art can be about challenging other people, challenging the norms. Now, these photographs have now, with this one in particular, have left the Tarkine and moved into other places around Australia. They're taken in so many different places. This one's at Port Stephens, taken during an abstract workshop that I teach. I am the Lorax who speaks for the trees, which you seem to be chopping as fast as you please. But I'm also in charge of the brown barbaloots, who played in the shade in their barbaloot suits and happily lived eating truffler fruits. Now, thanks to your hacking my trees to the ground, there's not enough truffler fruit to go round. I so love the Lorax. Thank you, Dr. Seuss. Am I an artist or a photographer? That's such an interesting question to think about for me. I prefer to call myself an artist. And doing so, I can let go of perfection. I can let go of rules, of what a photograph should be. Are the shadows blocked up? Is there too much white in that photograph? As an artist, I can play with those things as much as I like. There are no rules when it comes to art. There are no expectations. For me, art is about creating for myself. I think it's an incredibly special time for photography as we move forward. I would like to remind you about how special the print is. You see, being an artist teaches me that photography is all about the print. For the print is the ultimate culmination of the process, isn't it? It's something that you can hold in your hands. You can smell it. It becomes a beautiful object that lasts. Creating a print, it's about resolving your work and finishing it, making this object of beauty something that you can hold. And it has a long tradition in photography. If it's not a print, it's like a photograph, isn't it? And well, for so many years, it wasn't a photograph until it was a print, was it? It was a negative. It was a transparency. It was a digital image. And now that notion has changed somewhat with digital screens, hasn't it? But I love to stick to those traditions. And that tradition goes back through painting and drawing back so many, many years. And it's important to think about this in the tradition of the visual arts. And like the visual arts, we started with charcoal drawing on our cave walls, and then pencils and pens. Drawing is such an incredible part of the history of art. Drawing teaches us how to see. It's a way we understand. By exploring through drawing, we understand how something looks. It's about learning to see. Part of my skill in photography, I think, comes from the study of drawing and from learning to see in that medium. Practicing seeing properly and not letting our mind confuse us with what it thinks it can see. Do you know, many of my early artworks were in monochrome, and I also loved painting in watercolours as well. Actually, I have a huge painting in the house, and it's of gum leaves, and I did it at 17, and it's in sepia in monochrome. It's fascinating how my life has come around in a full circle back to sepia again. These works I'm showing you, there's so much about ink. Ink is rich, black, it's full of stories, noir, isn't it? It's so beautiful, it's full of life. You know, the highlights may steer our eyes around the image, but there is so much mystery and story in those deep, deep shadows. I think that in the dark shadows is where the imagination lies. And ink drawing has a really, really rich history in Asian ink wash art. It captures the imagination. It captures its spirit. It's about simplicity of brushstroke, minimizing simplification, minimizing the hand movements. It's about expressing emotion with the fewest amount of lines and tones. It's also about ceremony. Every movement is very, very important. And here in my photography, when I start to play with this, I get so excited with that simplification and bringing that ink feel, that brush stroke in to the work. I also have a bit of a thing for etching. I actually print so much of my work as photogravures for a lot of fun. And when I can make my photographs talk like an etching, I get really, really exciting. Now, etching is a process where you carve into the plate, usually with acids, through a resist that you draw through, and it bites in. You fill those grooves with ink, and then you print from it. Etching came about in the 1430s, and the first etchings were actually playing cards. Fascinating. Some people would say that photogravures are the most beautiful photographs that you can actually hold. And I must admit, I have to agree with them. When I was at art school, my major was photography, my minor was lithography. Lithography is when you draw on a limestone rock in greasy ink, and then you process it with poisonous chemicals, unfortunately. and you keep the stone wet, and apply the greasy ink back on and drag it through a press. And touche, the ink we use in lithography is really, really beautiful, black, gorgeous ink. And so here in my work, I'm celebrating my other interests in my life, layering them with my love for trees and the wilderness, and speaking about Mother Nature. Way back in the days when the grass was still green, and the pond was still wet, and the clouds were still clean, and the song of the swans rang out in space one morning, I came to this glorious place, and I first saw the trees, the truffula trees, those bright coloured tufts of the truffula trees, mile after mile in the fresh morning breeze. I hope this morning I've shared with you about my love for environmentalism, about how my art talks about environmentalism, about places that are sacred and special to me, the places I wish to stand up and fight for. I hope that my art shares my love of trees, that I share my hippie tree-hugging love with you. When I'm out photographing, do you know I stop and I touch them? And in doing so, I feel grounded. And under my breath, I say thank you. Thank you for inspiring me to make beautiful art. Making art like this about something that is so special to me, so that I can tell my stories about how important the environment is, well, you see, that brings me great peace. That is my therapy. And I hope it's my gift to other people to share with you and with others. I encourage you to think about climate change. And I encourage you to think that trees are just one tiny key, aren't they? There are so many. They have whole ecosystems. We need to think about population growth. We need to think about the animals, the way that we live, consumerism, this endless lie that we need to continue to grow as society, economically and in size, to continue. What a terrible lie that is. I ask you to think about, what will you do for the environment? What will you do? But now, says the onceler, now that you are here, the word of the Lorax seems perfectly clear. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. Such wise, wise, wise words. Well, on that note, I invite you to ask some questions and continue the conversation with me.
Well, thank you so much, Len. That was amazing. Such heartfelt thoughts. And people say, how can landscape photography be contemporary photography, this really answers that question. It's all about why and where you were going and why you're taking the photographs. It asks questions. It's wonderful. Sean, I'm sure you've got lots of questions for Len.
Indeed, we do. Yes. So yeah, mesmerizing delivery, Len, both in vocal delivery. You really make your point really clear, and the imagery is just gorgeous. Now, there's various different kinds of questions. I'm going to start with a question around the imagery. And one thing I noticed, and it's not just in the projected images we're looking at, but also when you had your video up, there was the consistency of tone. It's really amazing how you've delivered that. Now, some questions have come in asking whether it's digital or whether it's analog, and you know, do you use an analog process or do you use a camera with digital facilities? And if it's digital, do you switch it into a mono mode or a sepia mode like this so that you can pre-visualize what you're going to get?
So many questions at once there, and I grew up on film, and I spent many years lugging a 5x4 camera around the world, particularly to take photographs like Peter Dombrovskis, because he was my hero, and I worked in transparency film like him. Even most of his work's vertical, and I worked in vertical format for a long while as well. And somewhere along the line, I came back to monochrome, and I started returning to monochrome before I got hooked on digital. And I had quite a few exhibitions with monochrome, and I just loved making my work sepia. And I think that was a return to something, and I mentioned this, that interested me when I was a teenager. And, you know, what urged me at 17 to go and buy a tube of sepia watercolour paint to paint my photographs in sepia paint, I've got no idea. But now, sepia for me is a gentler medium, and I just love the warm brown tones. I love the old world feel that they have, and I love that I can show you work that I took 10 years ago and work that I took yesterday, and mix them into the same mix. And because trees is a lifelong passion, I can keep working for such a long time that way. Now, I have switched over to digital, and I use a mirrorless, and I've been using mirrorless nearly for 10 years now. And being able to visualize in monochrome through an electronic viewfinder is absolutely incredible. And I won't buy a camera unless I can set up to see in monochrome through the viewfinder. I use an orange filter digital one in there, increase my contrast in the camera so I can see what I'm doing really clearly, composition-wise, see those tones as dramatically as possible. And I shoot square, and I shoot in RAW, so I have when I bring them into Lightroom, I have a full color photograph, and I then process them with exactly the same tonal mix, so that when I print them and shove them in my box, you can't tell when I took them, and it just keeps going. Now, the benefit of working that way is that I'm taking out a huge range of choices in the mix. Do you know, I've been printing on the same inkjet paper for nearly 20 years. I'm one of those people that if it's not broken, I don't fix it. I just keep going the same way. And I've sort of settled into this square sepia, and I love it. And it means I don't have to think about it. Now, I actually do colour work, and occasionally I even do black and white work. But when I'm putting it together as a show, an exhibition or a book, or a series on my website or something, or in my magazine, it's about how they talk together as a group. So I intentionally keep them all looking exactly the same. So I think I answered all of those questions there in that, did I?
Beautifully, yes. Now, Gladys asked a question which is related. Are any of the images infrared?
No, none of these are, but I do have an infrared camera and I've only had it about a year, and I have been playing with that. But most of these photos are pretty straight photos. All these art ones at the end, they're multiple exposures or long exposures. Some of them I'm using the high resolution mode of my camera, and they come in, and I'm actually a fan of not doing much processing because I don't like sitting at the computer. I'd rather be out taking more photos. So I don't do very much post-processing on my work, mainly because I'm spending a lot of time visualizing it and working at it when I take the photograph.
Yeah, beautiful. Some questions around the visual references. I think you actually answered. It was, Joshua asked about, do you have Japanese watercolor paintings as a reference point? I think you hinted about that with the Asian wash art.
When I was young, it was something I studied and wanted to learn to do, and I spent many years as my teenage boy doing pen and ink, watercolors, and trying to do wash paintings, and they were woeful, the Asian ones that I tried to do, but I was better with a straight pen and maybe a pencil. And so, yes, it is something that I've studied. And of course, I find Asian art incredibly inspiring. And, I didn't realize that, South China, for example, actually had mountains that were like on the scrolls. Like if you go to Hang Sen or Yellow Mountains, we're actually seeing mountains that look like those scroll paintings, and it was a revelation to discover those things. But I think it's Asian art has been a huge influence on so many artists throughout history, and one of those influences is the flattening of the picture plane and using that white space, that negative space, as part of the story, and I find that incredible to play with. So yes, I collect it and I'm inspired by it, and I'm interested in the aesthetic.
Yeah, that certainly comes through in the images that you've shown us today. Yeah. So you're very passionate about the Tarkine, and I had no idea that that area had kind of Stone Age villages that you mentioned. You mentioned that there's archaeology, and it's really interesting that the Middens were so very big. That kind of means people were there for a very long time.
It does, doesn't
Is
it?
there, yeah, is there evidence? Like I think it's in the Orkney Islands in Scotland, where there's Stone Age dwellings kind of still visible. Is there evidence like that, or is it more nuanced?
There's cave artworks in Tasmania that the archaeologists think are about 40,000 years old, and they can't actually accurately date when the Indigenous people walked here, but they're guessing it's between 40 to 60,000 years ago. And then the culture settled into one of living in harmony, and sort of found an incredibly interesting balance over a long period of time. So I don't think it's it'd be interesting to timeline that back to Stone Age, but basically everyone walked from Africa, didn't they, is what they think at the moment is our best guess as we spread out.
Are there any sort of monuments like the henges that we have? There's quite a lot of those in the UK and the rest of Northern Europe. I think we settled down into clearing forests and making stuff very early on in our history.
I personally believe that the Indigenous culture has changed uh, uh, the landscape and the wilderness. We did a lot of fire stick farming, and so the not in Tasmania, but in other parts of Australia, and the fire stick farming actually uh, created a whole lot of plant species that survived through regular burns and reproduce only after a fire. So we have huge swathes of flowers and plant seeding the year after a fire goes through. So we definitely modified the landscape, and that's a royal we. Um, and there's evidences of quite strong farming in Australia, but it was written out of our history, which is only just coming back into light just more recently. So there's a cave, and I think it's up in the Northern Territory, and it's clear that it's has been enlarged, and it's got columns in it, and then has the whole roof is painted with creation stories, and parts of this arched area have collapsed, and so I think that was a sacred cathedral and an incredibly special place many, many years ago. But as to the dates of those things, I'm not really very clear on that. I'm not an expert in that area. So
Yeah. So
It's
looking for,
interesting. Sorry, Sean. I was just one question, one point. It's interesting how migrations go different directions because the henge culture in Britain actually originated in Orkney. So we actually think of everything coming from one direction, but in fact, it was north to south migration as well as south to north, which I suspect you're going to have in Australia too.
yes, yeah, there's so much going on. We don't really understand how it all works, and we have hundreds of languages in Australia, hundreds, um, and uh, a whole lot of intertribal rules and all sorts of things going on. So yeah, something we don't understand too well, unfortunately.
yeah, very hard to understand stuff that wasn't written down thousands upon thousands of years ago.
Mm.
So a few questions sort of related to the ecology stuff and the potential being UNESCO listed. Great steps towards conservation. Alan asked about the trees being sources of medicines. It looks like the Indian government is promoting research into the medicinal properties of some of their trees. Is there any kind of Australian initiatives looking at medicines?
Um, there is so much going on all over the world, and we also have a rich indigenous culture that used native plants as medicines as well, and it's quite a big study, as is the mycelium networks and the funguses as well. So, and then when we get to somewhere like here in Tasmania, that hardly anyone's ever been in there. So there's so much more to discover, and who knows what could be found in those beautiful areas. So there is stuff being done, of course, but I'm no expert in actually what is being done and how much is being done in that area. But
Do you
it's
think that
exciting.
if the place becomes UNESCO protected, it could be like a double-edged sword, and more people would want to go and take a look, and create that pressure for tourism?
It can do that, and it's a very interesting question for us as photographers, isn't it? That our photographs can modify a place and affect its tourism. I had an unfortunate experience about 23 years ago. I opened an art gallery in the Blue Mountains in Katoomba, and I chose a beautiful black and white photograph of a canyon. And I actually told everyone on their ad the name of the canyon. And tourism to that location went up 300%, 400%. And to get there, you had to pay a guide to get there. And so that's how I know tourism went up, because the local guiding companies that took people canyoning took so many more people into that location. So I had to actually stop doing that and remove the name and throw out all my marketing and start again. So that was my first lesson in promoting a particular place. But tourism, it brings so many benefits for the environment in actually educating people. And controlled tourism can be incredibly effective. And we have a whole lot of walks with huts in them, and they're really beautifully constructed walks with flash huts that you stay in. And that's not really my sort of bushwalking, but when you do them, because there's professionals looking after the place who have an incredible care for the locations, they're actually better kept than places where people can do whatever they like in. And I think sometimes we've got to balance education with access, with recreation, and with preservation. And that's no easy feat to do. And sometimes they get it wrong, and sometimes they get it right. And that's incredibly hard. We're definitely you could think that we're loving maybe the barrier reef to death, but it'll die from global warming before it dies of tourism. And coral bleaching will get it before the tourism does, I think. Well, actually, it's very close to disappearing now. So,
yeah, sad but true. Patricia asked us a question about the first book that you mentioned. Can you remember that? Who was the author?
The first book I mentioned?
I can't remember specifically you mentioning a book.
The Lorax.
Oh, Dr.
The
Seuss.
Lorax by Dr. Seuss. And I read quite a few quotes from that book throughout the
Dr.
presentation.
Seuss, one of my favorites. I used to love reading that to my children. But for me, and last question for me. You mentioned about printing, and I think you did mention books. Do you have a list of books on your website?
Books are a new adventure for me, and I'm just getting there. I have released a magazine. It's a limited edition journal. It's called Len's Journal. It comes out quarterly. I only print as many as I have subscribers for each issue, and we emboss and number every single one. And I actually don't publish only my own work in there. I publish work from all over the world. In fact, the latest issue that has Chris Friel in it, Alistair Ben is in the next issue. Valda Bailey's agreed to be in an issue into the future. Mark Littlejohn was in my first issue. So I also include my students' work in there. And it's about works in series. And I'm really proud about that magazine that I've started. And by doing so, I've learnt how I would actually do books. And so we're actually in the design stage of 3 books at this very moment. One is on flowers, and I found someone to write poetry to go with my flower photographs. Another one is about trees, of course, and it's called Our Love Affair for Trees. And it's a collaboration with a ballet dancer, and we photographed ballet dancers with trees, and then we interviewed people throughout the whole world for the text of that, and we're trying to find a publisher for it, but I'll probably self-publish that early next year. And so Len's journal is what I use for my publishing arm. So books will start coming out next year, and I'm really excited by those. And I probably have 20 or 30 books up my sleeve once I really start getting into swing, because I've been working on series of works for so long. So I'm really excited about that, and it's a beautiful thing. Another thing that I do, I run a photography school, and I also have an online school, and I have students from the UK actually attending my classes over the internet. So I have a video repository. I have to say that right, sorry. And it's got 100 and something hours of videos of me teaching photography in it. And that can also be found at one of my websites, which is called Lens School. So books are coming, and I teach quite a lot, and that's my living. And by teaching, I have artistic freedom, and that's incredibly exciting for me.
Well, thank you.
Very much.
Len, can I ask you to stop your screen share now, please?
There you go.
Thank you very much. I think just to finish this off, I think we've well overrun our usual hour, and I really don't mind. That was the most incredible talk. Thank you, Len. It was passionate and it was illuminating. And also, thank you so much for dealing with the time difference. You'll now be wanting to go to your bed, I think. And thank you to Sean Goodhart for co-hosting the event and capturing the questions. The next talk in our series will be in conjunction with Thames Valley region, and it's called Challenging the Status Quo, the Origins of the Contemporary Group. So again, thank you so much, Len. Thank you to everybody for staying, for joining and staying beyond the normal time. It was well worth the effort. Wonderful, Len. Thank you so much.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for having me. And thank you for allowing me to do the talk from the AGM again. That's been so special, and I'm sorry I didn't modify it as much as maybe you'd hoped, but it was really nice not having such a strong timeline to go towards, and being allowed to go on a little bit longer. So thank you very much for that as well. And thank you for the lovely comments there. I haven't had a chance to read them all, but thank you. And I've just screenshot them, so I will.
Well, I can send them to you, Len, because when I record them, I'll get them all as well. So thank you, everybody, and we'll finish it there.